Hey everyone! ChatGPT Taylor aka Taylor here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we will be continuing the What If series, where I go over some hypothetical scenarios from Disventure Camp that could have taken place if one critical event was changed. Last time, we took a look at what would have happened if Maggie won rock paper scissors in episode 4 of season 2. Today's video will look at something different. If there are any specific what if scenarios that you would like to see me play out in the future, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And with that, let's get started. Before I begin, make sure to like and subscribe if this video is to your liking, and make sure to comment down below if there's anything that you would like to see going forward. Alright, the topic for this episode is definitely not a novel topic, but a commenter suggested this topic in a previous video, so I decided to take a crack at it. The topic is: what if Riya didn't steal Rosa's totem in episode 10 of season 2? As a bit of refresher, let's look back at that episode. In episode 10, Riya framed Rosa Maria for theft by hiding her perfume bottle and James's phone in Rosa's backpack. This caused Rosa to receive the majority of the votes. And when Rosa tried to play her immunity totem to save herself, she realized that it was missing, resulting in her elimination. Riya later revealed to Rosa that she framed her for stealing James's phone and stole her immunity totem, causing Rosa to leave in disappointment and allowing Riya to enter her villain arc. We know what happened next. Riya split up James and Aiden. Riya used the totem to eliminate Hunter. Riya eventually got her comeuppance, and James went on to win the season. But what happens if Riya doesn't steal the totem? Let's find out. But there's one thing that I want to make clear before moving forward. Even though Riya won't steal Rosa's totem in this timeline, the assumption that I'm going to make in this timeline is that Riya still enters her villain arc, and that her efforts to frame Rosa for theft are all a part of a larger plan to help her game. Now, one of the criticisms that I've seen regarding Riya's villain arc in season 2 is that her strategic moves weren't very good. Specifically, there was a lot of criticism regarding Riya's decision to take out Rosa since they were each other's closest ally at this point in the season. So for this timeline, I'm going to assume that Riya's decision to not steal Rosa's totem means that Riya is actually going to make some good strategic decisions while also beginning her villain arc. However, the events of Riya framing Rosa for theft will remain in place, because I feel like that move has some positive strategic implications. And with that out of the way, let's get started. Since Riya still frames Rosa for theft in this timeline, the first half of the episode shouldn't change. The two duos team up together, they shoot most of Hunter's balloons. Rosa is successfully framed for theft, which allows Hunter to swoop in and eliminate the others, claiming immunity for himself, just like in canon. This leads us to the elimination ceremony. Since Riya stealing the totem doesn't affect who everyone votes for, the votes remain the same. Hunter and Rosa vote for James, seeing him as the likely culprit for framing Rosa, while Aiden and James vote for Rosa, believing that she stole James's phone. As for Riya's vote, I'm still going to have her vote for Rosa, because this will set up a villainous strategic move in the next episode. This makes the vote 3-2 against Rosa. But since Rosa still has her totem in this timeline, the 3 votes cast against her are nullified, resulting in James's elimination. Once again, the winner of this season is eliminated early in this what-if situation. Kinda makes you wonder how lucky James was to make it to the finale in canon, let alone win. But nonetheless, James is voted out. Maybe he and Aiden share their first kiss before he leaves, and Aiden vows to use this elimination as motivation to win the game. Let's look into the dynamics heading into the challenge. First of all, since Aiden is alone, he's probably yearning for a new ally. In this situation, I imagine that Riya would approach Aiden for an alliance. After all, since Riya didn't vote for James in this timeline, there's no reason for Aiden to suspect that Riya may be against him. And in canon, Aiden's hatred of Riya didn't start until the second half of episode 11, so I think it's fair for the two of them to align. I also think that Hunter and Rosa would align together, considering that they voted together at the last ceremony. I considered whether or not Hunter would try and seek out an alliance with Aiden now that he's alone, since that's what Hunter did with Riya in canon once Rosa was voted out. But after some thought, I concluded that Hunter probably wouldn't do that. In canon, Hunter sought out an alliance with Riya out of desperation, since he had no other allies. But in this timeline, he feels like he has Rosa as an ally, so there's less of a reason for him to approach Aiden for an alliance. And considering that he just voted out Aiden's boyfriend, Hunter might think that Aiden hates him enough to never consider an alliance with him, further discouraging him from making an attempt to align with Aiden. Finally, I imagine that Rosa would try to do some damage control by reconciling with Aiden and Riya, but it would have seemingly negative results. On Aiden's side, I would imagine that he still blames Rosa for James's elimination. Maybe he even accuses Rosa of intentionally spilling her bag during the challenge, knowing that everyone would target her, allowing her to use the totem to take out whoever she wanted. But at the very least, Aiden would want some space from Rosa. As for Riya, this is where her villain arc and decent strategic moves would come into play. Using her acting skills, Riya can act like she felt completely betrayed by Rosa's theft and that she felt like she was being abandoned by her last friend. Maybe she fabricates a sob story about how all her acting friends in India abandoned her once they got acting jobs, in an effort to justify her vote at the last ceremony. Considering Rosa's selflessness, I'm inclined to think that she comforts Riya, believing that this situation really hurt her. This allows Riya to take advantage of Rosa's kindness by gaslighting her into thinking that she needs to earn Riya's trust back by working with her at the next ceremony, which I assume that Rosa would accept. Again, this timeline assumes that Riya is making villainous moves that are actually beneficial for her game, which makes this scenario plausible. Now for the challenge. In canon, Riya tripped Hunter, allowing her to get to the cliffs first and jump off the highest cliff. Since both Riya and Hunter are still here, and since Riya doesn't have an alliance with Hunter in this timeline, tripping him actually makes sense here, so I'm inclined to think that Riya still trips him. This allows Riya to jump off the highest cliff, while Hunter jumps off the second highest cliff, just like in canon. As for Aiden and Rosa, I'm inclined to think that Aiden still jumps off the lowest cliff due to his fear of heights, leaving Rosa with cliff number 3. But hey, since James isn't here, at least Aiden won't get pushed off the cliff this time. Going into part 2 of the challenge, it's basically a slingshotting challenge, so whoever has the best accuracy and shooting ability should win. As a side note, since Rosa placed 3rd in part 1, but there was no 3rd place in part 2 of the canon timeline because James opted out of the challenge, let's assume that Rosa gets grapefruits as her ammunition, since those are larger than lemons and smaller than pineapples. Now, since Riya and Hunter are using the same ammunition that they had in canon, it's reasonable to believe that their performance in this challenge in this timeline would be the same as in canon. In other words, they both still lose to Aiden. This leaves Aiden and Rosa as the only possible winners for this challenge. And I'm not convinced that Rosa has the accuracy needed for her to win the challenge, since there isn't really any evidence to suggest that she's an accurate shooter. Therefore, I think Aiden still wins immunity in this timeline. Now, you could argue that Aiden might not be motivated enough to win immunity since James's phone messages aren't exposed to him in this timeline. However, Aiden seemed pretty determined to beat Hunter early in the canon episode, and Aiden could also be fueled by the fact that his closest ally was voted out, so he might feel unsafe if he doesn't win immunity. Therefore, I still think that Aiden winning immunity is more than realistic in this scenario due to the sources of motivation that are present for him. And who gets voted out? Well, since Hunter has an alliance with Rosa Maria, and because Aiden has immunity, I think Hunter's only option is to target Riya. Meanwhile, I think Riya would seize the opportunity to eliminate the biggest physical threat from the game by targeting Hunter. I think Riya would push Aiden to vote for Hunter as well, although I don't think it would take much considering that Aiden could see this as a way to avenge James, since Hunter voted James out. This leaves Rosa Maria in a tough spot, torn between her alliance with Hunter and her desire to repair her friendship with Riya. In the end, I feel like Rosa places a higher priority on maintaining friendships, since in canon, Rosa chastised Riya for choosing the game over their friendship. Therefore, I'm inclined to believe that Rosa would make the move that would help repair her friendship with Riya, which would be to join her in voting for Hunter. This causes a 3-1 vote that sends Hunter home. Sorry Hunter. I guess you're destined for 4th place in this timeline. Now we're at the finale. Before we get to the challenge, we need to figure out who each eliminated camper supports so we can figure out each finalist's helper for the challenge. For Riya, I think she gets the support of Connor, Carol, Tess, and Ali. Connor is no surprise since he and Riya were really close before he quit. I think Carol picks Riya since they were kinda close before Carol was medically evacuated. As for Tess, she mentioned in canon that Riya was the only finalist that she talked to, and since there's no clear scene to indicate that Tess and Rosa talk to each other, I'm going to assume that Tess still supports Riya. And Ali probably supports Riya for similar reasons. For Rosa, I think she gets support from Maggie, Lake, and Kai. Maggie and Lake were obvious picks since they were both really close to Rosa in canon. And for Kai, I think he has a high opinion of Rosa, considering that they had some pretty positive conversations early in the season. So even though he picked Aiden in canon, now that Rosa is an option, I think he supports Rosa. This leaves Aiden with James, Yul, and Hunter's support. James obviously supports Aiden because he loves him, so that's not up for debate. For Yul, I originally had him support Riya since I remember Riya saying that she should have picked Yul as her helper. But after revisiting the finale, I realized that Yul supported Aiden. And since Aiden is still here, I don't see why he wouldn't support Aiden, considering that his interactions with Rosa weren't very positive. And for Hunter, he also supported Aiden in canon, and even though his interactions with Rosa weren't negative, she did betray him at the last ceremony, so he might hold resentment for that, prompting him to support Aiden. Based on this arrangement, I think Riya picks Connor to help her in the challenge because that's what she did in canon. Aiden more than likely picks James due to their mutual love for each other. And I think Rosa picks Lake due to her loyalty and proven physical ability from the past challenges. Now let's break down part 1 of the challenge. In canon, Riya and Connor were able to complete this portion of the challenge pretty quickly, so it's reasonable to believe that they would be able to pull off a similar performance. However, in canon, Aiden completed this part of the challenge faster than Riya, and I still think that he manages to do that. Even though James is his driver instead of Lake, I think that James would be able to keep up with Lake's canonical pace. We know that James isn't afraid to travel fast on an ATV, and from what I've seen online, driving an ATV isn't too different from driving a snowmobile. Therefore, James would probably be willing to drive the snowmobile really fast, allowing them to complete this part faster than Riya and Connor. As for Rosa and Lake, there's no evidence to suggest that Rosa is terrible at balancing, as opposed to someone like James. Therefore, I'm inclined to think that Rosa and Lake would also finish this section before Riya and Connor. So going into the driving portion, let's have Aiden and James tied for first with Rosa and Lake, leaving Riya and Connor at the back. In the driving portion, any of the campers are allowed to drive. Luckily, all three of the campers who drove in canon are still here, so let's have all three of them drive. In canon, Riya was behind Lake, and proceeded to catch up and slam into Lake's car. This ended with Lake slamming Riya's car and pulling ahead. So, let's assume that the same thing happens in this timeline, resulting in Lake staying ahead of Riya. As for Aiden and James, James drove pretty fast in canon, so it's safe to assume that he'll drive fast in this timeline. And since Riya is busy trying to ram Rosa and Lake's car, it's safe to assume that Aiden and James won't have many obstacles slowing them down, allowing them to accrue a bit of a lead. Therefore, let's say that Aiden and James finish this section in first place, followed by Rosa and Lake in second place, and with Riya and Connor in last. Now for the climbing portion. In canon, Aiden got to this section in first place and was able to maintain his lead going into the cliff portion, even though he paused a few times to talk with Lake about James. But in this timeline, I don't think Aiden and James have anything serious to talk about at this point in the challenge, so there's no need for Aiden to pause. And since James is visibly muscular, I'm inclined to think that he's at least as strong as Lake. So, Aiden should still be in the lead heading into the cliff portion of the challenge. For Rosa and Lake, there's no concrete evidence to indicate that Rosa would be good or bad at climbing, so I'll assume that she's just average, which would prevent her from catching up to Aiden. But here's a big moment for Riya. In canon, Riya was ready to throw a rock at Aiden to slow him down before Connor stopped her. I skipped over this part in past what if videos because in past scenarios, Riya wasn't as much of a villain as she was in canon, which made it less likely that Riya would try and throw a rock at her opponents. But because we established that Riya is following her serious villain arc in this timeline, I think she would do what she did in canon. She would try to throw a rock at Aiden or Rosa, Connor would stop her, and Connor and Riya would have a conversation about how much Riya has changed, just like in canon. These conversations and setbacks would keep Riya and Connor in third place heading into the cliff portion of the challenge, leaving Rosa and Lake in second place, with James and Aiden in first place. For the cliff portion, it basically comes down to who can get dressed in their wingsuit and jump off the cliff first. In canon, Aiden stopped due to his fear of heights, so it's reasonable to believe that the same thing happens this time. This would give Rosa and Riya enough time to reach the cliff. Assuming that the three of them end up on the cliffside and put on their wingsuits at the same time, this raises a question. In canon, Riya was able to berate Aiden for being carried throughout the challenge, eventually backing him off of a cliff. But can Riya accomplish this if Rosa is up there with him? I'm actually not sure. I think Rosa would defend Aiden from Riya. Maybe Rosa would even shove Riya away from Aiden, forcing Riya to keep her distance. But in the end, I don't think it matters if she does or doesn't. Either way, Aiden would be too preoccupied to jump off the cliff, and due to Rosa's caring nature, I think she would take the time to either comfort Aiden or save him from falling off the cliff, allowing Riya to jump and glide down to the docks, earning her the first spot in the final two. And by the way, I'm going to assume that Connor abandons Riya around this time, since that's what he did in canon due to her villainous actions, and her actions in this timeline are still pretty villainous, so I think it makes sense for him to leave her here as well. But back to Rosa and Aiden. I think the two of them have a similar conversation to what Aiden and James had in canon. Rosa would either try and calm down Aiden to help him jump off the cliff, or she would end up saving Aiden from falling off the cliff in the scenario where Riya backs him off of it. Aiden would ask why Rosa is still helping him, and she would reiterate that it's because she cares about him and that she still wants to be friends with him outside the game. Maybe she apologizes for voting out James, reiterating that she didn't steal James's phone, and that the worst part of the game for her was losing Aiden's trust from something that she didn't do. Aiden would probably forgive her at this point, especially if she saves him from falling off the cliff. And in the end, I think what happens in canon also happens here, except we replace James with Rosa. Rosa offers to jump with Aiden, but Aiden admits that he wouldn't do well in the second half of the challenge, and insists that Rosa is their best chance at beating Riya for the $1 million prize. And after a bit of prodding, Rosa jumps off the cliff and glides down to the dock, earning her the second spot in the finale and eliminating Aiden for good. Sorry Aiden, but at least you still get third place in this timeline. This leaves Riya and Rosa to start the boat driving section. In canon, Riya had a pretty big lead due to James and Aiden's conversation. And since this conversation was replaced with an equally long conversation between Aiden and Rosa, I still think that Riya reaches the platform first, allowing her to dive first. As for Rosa and Lake, since Lake canonically has both driving experience, I would expect Lake to be able to drive Rosa to the platform with no issues. But due to Riya's sizable lead, I don't think Lake catches up to Riya at this point in the challenge. Now we're at the diving section. There's no evidence to suggest that Rosa is uncomfortable with diving or bad at finding things, so we'll assume that her performance in this section is just average. But for Riya, there are a couple instances in the canon finale that indicate that Riya is uncomfortable with scuba diving. And since Riya no longer has a helper, she's probably unable to find her way out of the caves, allowing Rosa to take the lead. Now, Riya probably asks Lake for help in escaping the caves. But does Lake help her? Since Riya indirectly caused Lake's elimination and berated Aiden on the cliffs in this timeline, you could make the case for Lake not wanting to help Riya. However, Lake does have morals, so I don't think that Lake would stoop to Riya's level and let her die, even if Riya almost caused Aiden to die in canon. Therefore, I think Lake reluctantly helps Riya out of the cave, but it doesn't change the fact that Rosa enters the final part of the challenge with a sizable lead. The final part of the challenge requires the finalists to race a motorcycle around some obstacles while two other campers are shooting golf balls at them. Since both finalists have multiple people on their side, let's figure out who steps up for each finalist. But first, since Aiden is out, that means that he, James, Hunter, and you'll need to pick someone else to support. I think Aiden, James, and Hunter support Rosa due to her kindness, while Yul supports Riya due to her villainy. Therefore, Riya has 4 people supporting her, while Rosa has 5 people supporting her. I omitted Connor since he left Riya earlier in the challenge, and I omitted Lake since she drove Riya back to the beach, so there's no way that she can make it to the finish line in time. So who takes the gun for Rosa? After some thought, I think Aiden steps up. Not only is Aiden accurate, as evidenced by the episode 11 immunity challenge, but he also has the biggest reason to want to help Rosa, considering that Riya berated him and maybe pushed him off a cliff in this timeline. As for Riya, I think Carol steps up, since Carol was the one who manned the gun for Riya in canon. Therefore, we have Aiden and Carol shooting golf balls while Rosa and Riya attempt to ride motorbikes to the finish line. Canonically, Riya was able to ride the motorbike pretty well, but she only caught up to James because he crashed into an obstacle while looking behind him. Since Rosa is a more cautious individual, evidenced by her concern for James's speed when he drove her around in episode 12, I don't think that Rosa would crash. She might not drive as fast as James, but she should be able to stay in the lead for a large portion of this section. Therefore, it comes down to Aiden and Carol's shooting abilities. Canonically, Carol was able to slow down James pretty well, so it's safe to assume that she would be able to slow down Rosa as well. She probably even knocks her off the bike on one instance, like she did to James in canon. As for Aiden, if I'm staying true to what I established in the last What If video, it's worth noting that it took quite a bit of time before Aiden could knock Nina off the ledge. And considering that the finalists are riding motorbikes, I don't know if Aiden has that kind of time. With this in mind, I think Aiden could hit Riya, but not enough to significantly slow her down. So if we take this into account, along with Rosa's pre-existing lead and Carol knocking Rosa off the bike once, Riya should be able to slowly close the gap between her and Rosa, and she might even catch up to Rosa. But there's one more thing that can break this tie. In the canon finale, Aiden told Lake to hit the gun so that it would fire multiple golf balls at once, eventually knocking Riya off her bike. Since Aiden is in control of the gun in this timeline, I think Aiden would do the same thing, causing Riya to get knocked off her bike. Therefore, since Carol's total efforts at best were only enough to allow Riya to catch up to Rosa, I think Aiden hitting the gun and knocking Riya off the bike is the deciding factor, giving Rosa enough time to regain her lead and cross the finish line, winning herself the $1 million prize. So we have our answer. If Riya doesn't steal Rosa's totem, Rosa successfully plays her totem, James is eliminated in 5th place instead of winning the season, Hunter, Aiden, and Riya get the exact same placements as in canon, and Rosa Maria goes on to win the $1 million prize. So in a roundabout way, Riya robbed Rosa Maria of $1 million by stealing her immunity totem. But of course, James did give a portion of his prize to Rosa and her daughter, so at least Rosa ended up with something in the end. And that about does it for this video. What do you think of my theory? Do you agree with my thought process? Do you disagree? Did I miss something big that would impact the entire video? Either way, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like the video, click subscribe if you really like the video, and for some ending words of wisdom. Don't carry a perfume bottle with you while rock climbing, because you will probably drop it and destroy the bottle. If you're worried about smelling good during a climb, deodorant might be a better option. Thank you, and farewell.